They don't interrupt you because you're unworthy. They interrupt because they don't anticipate consequences. They talk over you, violate your boundaries, and take more than they give, not because you're weak, but because you're safe. Too safe to matter, too predictable to fear, too eager to please. You smile first. You try to connect. You explain yourself before anyone even questions you. But in a Machiavellian world, being liked without being feared isn't influence. It's invisibility. You've been trained to be nice, polished, approachable. You were told to speak kindly, to smile more, to be emotionally available. But here's the truth. They're not responding to your kindness. They're responding to your lack of danger. Machiavelli in The Prince wrote that a ruler must master deception, not cruelty, but concealment, because what's seen is managed and what's managed is controlled. You are not here to be managed. You are here to be remembered. And no one remembers the man who made them feel safe. They remember the one who made them feel uncertain. In a room full of noise, it's not the loudest man who commands attention. It's the one who says nothing but makes people adjust their tone when he enters. Not out of admiration, but caution. Because when you become unreadable, you become untouchable. You don't need to speak louder. You need to be harder to decode. When you're always explaining, people are always dissecting you. But when you go silent, they fill in the blanks. And what they imagine is always more powerful than what you reveal. Don't be emotional, be deliberate. Don't be loud, be unrelenting. Walking like your silence is a secret they're not allowed to hear. Let them lean in. Let them guess. Let their own insecurity build a myth of who you might be. Machiavelli understood this better than most. Power isn't about visibility. It's about suggestion, about presence, about what remains unsaid. So here's the challenge. Stop trying to be accepted. Start being anticipated. Become the man they hesitate to interrupt. Not because of your volume, but because of the weight of your silence. If these words feel less like advice and more like a memory, something you've lived but never put into words, then leave a comment. Tell me when silence became your strength. Tell me when they only respected you after you left. And if this awakens something in you, a version of yourself that never begs, never explains, and never stays long enough to be figured out, then subscribe. Not to follow me, but to follow that part of yourself that finally stopped asking for permission. Part 1. You don't have to be dangerous, just perceived as dangerous. Real power doesn't announce itself. It enters quietly and reorders a room. You don't have to be a threat. You only have to be unreadable. Because people don't fear cruelty. They fear what they can't prepare for. Machiavelli warned, the greatest danger to a ruler is not rebellion, it's predictability. Once they know your triggers, your moves become part of their strategy. But when you withhold, when you move slower than expected, when you smile without explaining, you shift the energy, you change the rhythm, you become the variable. Let them guess what your silence means. Let them stumble over their own overthinking, because confusion is leverage, and silence is its trigger. They don't need to hear you roar. They need to wonder what you're capable of if pushed. When you slow down your reactions, when you delay your responses, when you hold your gaze just a moment too long, you unsettle them. Now they're adjusting to you. Now they're on your terrain. That's presence. That's psychological control. Every interaction is a battle for narrative. If you talk first, react first, explain first, you lose. But if you let them fill the silence, if you make them work to understand you, they start to fear misreading you. And that fear, that's power. Don't give them a pattern. Don't give them consistency. Give them tension. Give them contrast. A calm exterior hiding calculation. A warm nod followed by withdrawal. A moment of kindness with no follow-up. People fear contradiction. They call it mystery, but it's control. So next time you enter a room, don't bring your answers. Bring your stillness and let them write the questions. Let me ask you, when did they finally treat you with respect? Was it after you yelled? Or after you vanished? Was it after you explained? Or when you said nothing? Comment below. Tell me when they notice your absence more than your presence. And if you're ready to become that man, the one they recalibrate around, subscribe. Not to learn how to speak, but to master the discipline of saying almost nothing. Part 2. Strategic silence. The habits that make people second-guess themselves. Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the container of it in a world where everyone's performing. Speaking quickly, posting constantly, reacting emotionally, the man who masters restraint shifts the entire rhythm of the room. That's the first habit of silent power. Never react first. Let them talk. Let them provoke. Let them assume. You blink. You wait. You breathe, not because you're unsure, but because you're calculating. Machiavelli believed this deeply. The one who reacts first loses. The prince who shows his emotion early gives his enemies a roadmap. But the one who observes, who speaks last, ends the game with a single move. That pause, that slowness, it creates pressure because people aren't used to silence. They rush to fill it, to explain, to apologize, to confess. And every time they speak first, you gain ground. Second habit, speak slower. Say less. Leave earlier. It sounds simple, even obvious, but this is where most men fail. They speak fast to avoid awkwardness. They overexplain to be liked. They stay too long in conversations because they fear being misunderstood. But understand this. Power isn't found in your volume. It's found in your restraint. When you speak slower, people listen harder. When you say less, every word becomes heavier. When you leave early, you create mystery, and mystery lasts longer than presence. Third habit, withdraw to increase presence. The dog is always around. The wolf appears, then vanishes. You can't be respected if you're always available. If you never leave the room, they stop noticing you're there. But when you disappear emotionally, digitally, physically, they feel the drop. That's when your absence gains weight. That's when they realize he doesn't need this space. This space needs him. That's not arrogance. That's strategic detachment. A Machiavellian man does not chase. He appears, delivers precision, then exits. No rapping, no softness, just presence and distance. Fourth habit, never explain what doesn't need to be explained. You said no, that's enough. You left the party early, let it be. You change your mind, then it's changed. The moment you explain, you begin negotiating. And as Machiavelli warned, when a ruler negotiates with perception, he loses control of it. Explanations feel noble. They feel like clarity. But in the world of psychological dominance, clarity is currency, and you don't hand out currency for free. Fifth habit, stay emotionally neutral. In social games, people will test you. They'll poke at your calmness, joke about your quiet, try to trigger a response. Why? Because your silence makes them nervous. It reflects their own insecurity, and they want control back. They'll flirt, they'll guilt trip, they'll mock, they'll provoke, not because you're weak, but because you don't react. And that stillness, that unreadable face, it terrifies emotionally volatile. Because if they can't crack you, they have to assume you're stronger than they are. Let them assume. Smile, observe, withdraw. Because the longer they try to understand you, the more obsessed they become. And the more obsessed they become, the less control they have. You don't need to control people directly. Machiavelli knew this. Control the perception, and you control the environment. Silence, stillness, distance. These are not passive traits. They are strategies used intentionally. They shift power without ever raising your voice. So ask yourself now, which of these habits do you already carry? And which ones are you afraid to claim? Leave a comment. Tell me which tactic hit hardest. Tell me when silence saved your dignity. Tell me when stillness earned you more than words ever did. And if this is speaking to something buried in you, some version of yourself waiting to emerge, subscribe to the channel. Not because you want to be loud, but because you're learning to become undeniably present. And presence, real, unshakable presence, doesn't ask for space. It becomes a space. Part 3, emotional distance. How to become a consequence, not just a man. You're not just a man. You're a consequence. And until people feel that, you'll always be optional. The world doesn't fear what it understands. It fears what it can't control. And that's what you must become. Uncontrollable, unreadable, unshakable. Because when someone doesn't fear losing you, they'll take your time. They'll talk over you. They'll ask for favors without returning them. They'll push your boundaries. Because your presence has no weight. You're safe. You're predictable. You're emotionally accessible. But in a Machiavellian world, those aren't virtues. They're vulnerabilities waiting to be tested. Machiavelli said it plainly. It is better be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But here's what most miss. Fear isn't about cruelty. It's about influence. It's about what happens in their mind when you go quiet. Because a dangerous man doesn't shout. He just stops replying. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He withdraws. And in that silence, they feel the drop. That's when they reflect. That's when they replay what they said. That's when they realize you're no longer accessible on demand. And your absence becomes a mirror. Not because you punished them, but because your validation was their oxygen. And now they can't breathe the same. This is what Machiavelli meant by power through presence. Not through force, not through punishment, but through psychological repositioning. When you shift from being just a man to being a potential loss they can't afford, everything changes. They adjust their tone. They speak more carefully. They show up on time. They text back faster. They watch your silence like it's a forecast of their future. That's what emotional distance does. It rewires behavior. Not because you asked, but because you stopped asking. Now think about it. How many people ignored your words until you remove your presence? How many suddenly understood your value once you no longer offered it? That's not cruelty. That's gravity. That's the power of becoming a consequence. And here's the paradox. The more emotional access you give, the more they take you for granted. But the less access you offer, the more they value your presence, because it's not guaranteed. Machiavelli didn't need armies. He needed space. He needed silence. He needed uncertainty. Because when people can't read your next move, they either retreat or try to win your favor back. And both outcomes serve you. So the next time someone crosses your line, don't argue, don't explain, don't defend, withdraw. Quietly, completely, calmly. And when they come back, not if but when, don't return with softness. Return with stillness. Because now they know you're not someone to entertain. You're a line they regret crossing. And if you ever felt like the loyal one, the one who stayed long after you were disrespected, friendly even when mocked, available even when dismissed, then you already know how the story ends. You don't become unforgettable by being the one who always shows up. You become unforgettable by being the one whose absence hurts more than your presence ever begged to be felt. So I'll say it again. You are not just a man. You are a consequence, a presence that shifts atmospheres, a boundary that reshapes behavior. And once people feel that version of you, they will never treat you the same. If that spoke to you, if something you woke up reading these words, don't keep it inside. Leave a comment. Tell me when you became unavailable. Tell me when they started noticing what they used to overlook. And if you're ready to live as a presence they fear losing, subscribe. Not for tips, not for tactics, but for the return of the man who doesn't need to speak, because his silence already echoes. Part 4. Controlled inconsistency. The art of unsettling without saying a word. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what contradicts itself. They fear the man who smiles but might vanish tomorrow. The man who listens calmly but could destroy you without warning. The man who offers kindness with one hand and disappears before you can grab it. That's not confusion. That's strategy. That's the art of controlled inconsistency. And Machiavelli mastered it centuries ago. He wrote that a prince must learn how to be both fox and lion. Not one, not sometimes, both at once. Because nothing destabilizes a human psyche like contradiction, and nothing commands obedience like uncertainty. This is how you unsettle people without raising your voice. You show up, but you don't stay. You offer warmth, but no invitation. You give just enough to make them crave more, then disappear. They won't call it fear. They'll call it mystery. But deep down, they're unsettled. And that unease, That's where your leverage begins. Controlled inconsistency isn't recklessness. It's intentional rhythm disruption. Because when people don't know what version of you is walking through the door, they become more careful. They measure their tone. They rethink their words. They prepare for possibilities, not patterns. That's power. Let me be clear. This is not manipulation. It's emotional self-governance. It's refusing to be predictable in a world addicted to labels. Because the moment they figure you out, they begin managing you. They write your story. They control your character. But when you become a paradox, composed yet distant, kind yet unreadable, present yet unavailable, you break the narrative. Now they no longer know how to use you. So instead they watch you. And nothing is more powerful than being watched for no clear reason. That's what creates emotional tension, not drama, not shouting, just a quiet unease, like a still lake that hides something beneath. And that tension is where obedience is born. When they're not sure if you'll praise or punish. When they're not sure if your silence means rejection or design. When they can't tell if your smile means connection or calculation. That's when they stop trying to dominate and start trying not to provoke. Now think of your own life. Who are the people that made you nervous? Not with anger, but with uncertainty. The boss who never raised his voice, but you never wanted to disappoint. The friend who disappeared after betrayal. No explanation, no return. The lover who never begged, but left an echo when they walked out the door. They haunt us because they gave us nothing to hold on to. And in that silence, we filled the blanks with fear. That is strategy. That is silence weaponized. So how do you embody this? You don't react to everything. You don't answer every message. You don't match their emotional volume. You stay in rhythm with yourself, not with their moods. You correct them once, then you vanish. You compliment once, then you observe. You allow access but never full entry. And when they ask themselves, did I do something wrong? Let them sit with the question. Because the man who answers every question becomes common. But the man who leaves the question open becomes unforgettable. That's how you build psychological presence. Not by being loud, but by being felt in your absence. And that's what Machiavelli understood better than most. He didn't want to be feared because he was cruel. He wanted to be remembered because no one could quite figure him out. That's how you command space, even when you say nothing. That's how you make people watch their step, even when you haven't moved. And if you've ever felt like people only respect you when you leave, only value you when you're silent, you're not broken. You're just powerful in a way they don't yet know how to name. So stop trying to be understood. Start becoming a contradiction they can't look away from. Leave a comment. Tell me who haunts your memory, not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't say. And if this is unlocking a darker, sharper version of you, subscribe. Not for answers, but for tension. Because the ones who talk get noticed. But the ones who vanish before you understand them, they get remembered forever. Part 5. The final form. Presence that replaces power. Real power doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. Because once you master presence, you stop needing persuasion. You stop needing validation. You stop needing noise. Machiavelli didn't obsess over dominance. He studied influence, not through force, but through perception. And here's what he discovered. When your presence carries tension, people move around you like a storm is coming. They don't argue. They adjust. That's the final form. Not a man who proves, but a man they prepare for, just in case he decides to act. You've probably met this kind of man before. He walks into the room. He doesn't say much, but something shifts. People lower their voices, straighten their posture, measure their words. Why? Because his energy doesn't beg to be noticed. It demands recalibration, not through words, through presence. That's the kind of presence that outlasts conversations. The kind that walks away quietly, but lingers in the mind like an unanswered question. Now, let me ask you, what happens when people start adjusting themselves before you speak? What happens when your calmness becomes their mirror? They start editing their tone. They hesitate before crossing a line. They prepare for a reaction they've never even seen. That's not charisma. That's calculated restraint. You don't need to raise your voice. You need to raise your threshold for reaction. You don't need to correct them. You need to let your distance teach the lesson. Because the man who can control himself controls the room. Machiavelli believed, the fewer words you use, the stronger each one becomes. And when they can't predict your words, they start behaving carefully. Not because they fear your wrath, but because they respect the silence that could turn into anything. This is why the man who carries presence never chases closure. He never rushes to fix the misunderstanding. He lets the tension do the remembering. Because people forget what you said, but they remember what they felt when you said nothing. And that's how presence becomes power. Not when you shout louder, but when your silence makes them think longer. So what does this final form look like? You say little, but every sentence lands like a verdict. You show up rarely, but when you do, it resets the room. You don't need to warn. Your calm is the warning. You don't need to prove. Your withheld access is the proof. You walk in with stillness. You walk out with echo. And people remember you, not because you allowed, but because they still haven't figured out what your silence meant. That's how Machiavelli would lead today. No sword, no scream, just the unbearable weight of mystery. So if you've ever been overlooked, talked over, underestimated, it's not because you weren't enough. It's because you weren't opaque enough. And now you know. You don't need to bark. You don't need to beg. You don't need to explain. You stand. You watch. You let them wonder, and in their wondering, you become realer than their memories. So here's your challenge. Don't chase attention. Become a presence. Don't rush to reply. Let your silence shift the balance. And when you're ready to stop being understood and start being remembered, subscribe. Not because you need more information, but because you've outgrown the man who needed to explain himself. Part 6. The echo effect. Becoming the man they obsess over in silence. The loud ones, they're remembered in the moment. But the quiet ones, they echo in memory. They stay long after the room clears. Long after the noise fades. Long after everyone moves on. Except the ones who still replay your silence like it was a secret they were never meant to hear. That is the echo effect. And it's not accidental. It's built. See, most men rush to be understood. They overshare. They overexpose. They reveal too much, too fast, hoping to be accepted. But the man who becomes unforgettable is the one who felt real but never fully belonged. The one who stood close enough to leave a mark, but far enough to remain a question. That tension, it creates obsession. Because the human mind hates the unresolved. And you're no longer here to be a resolution. You're here to be a loop they can't close. So, how do you become that man? You give less than expected, then vanish sooner than they're ready. You drop a single sentence, then stay silent while they replay it 100 times. You show interest once, then go cold, not out of cruelty, but out of calibration. Because if you're too present, they consume you. If you're too distant, they forget you. But if you're almost theirs but never fully, you become an idea they can't delete. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote not just about power, but about staying in the mind of your enemy, your ally, your people. Even when you're gone, he knew presence fades, but tension lingers. And that's what you built now. Not a persona, not a brand, but a reputation of restraint. The way you enter a room, the way you speak less, pause more, leave early. The way your silence weighs more than their performance. You're not the man who seeks applause. You're the one whose absence feels like something was stolen. That's psychological presence. That's legacy. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them imagine the version of you they never quite reached. Because people don't obsess over what they had. They obsess over what they almost had. And you never belonged to them. You were just real enough to feel unforgettable and distant enough to haunt them. That's the final level. That's strategy without words. That's how Machiavelli would rule today. Not by controlling others, but by becoming the variable they can't control. So let your silence echo. Let your restraint echo. Let the version of you they couldn't read echo in every room you've already left. And if this journey awakens something in you, something deeper, something darker, but more centered than anything you've known. Leave a comment. Tell me what part changed you. Tell me when your silence became the warning. And if you want to keep building this presence, not for show, but for sovereignty, subscribe. Not for me, for you, because the man who is watched in silence becomes the one they never forget. And that is how power moves without a sound.